So guys, in this particular session, we are going to understand what is SSO. Let's say there is a company, let's say there is an employee here working in a particular company, and he has access to Active Directory. And then let's say there are so many other services, so many websites, like let's say this is payroll, this is HR system, this is SharePoint, this is OneDrive. Let's say there are so many services this particular person want to use. Just imagine a scenario wherein this person has to create a separate username and password for each of the services he wants to use. Don't you think it is going to be very typical and very difficult for somebody to manage? He need to
Yes,
have,
sir.
let's say, 20 username and 20 passwords. So 20 identities and then 20 passwords. So most often what will happen? The person will either have the same password for all of them, same username for all of them, or if they are different, because your company policy does not allow it to happen, then what this guy will do, he will just simply try to maintain a notebook or maybe write it somewhere on the desk, because he has to use these IDs all the time. We want to refrain from that particular risk, that the identity information should not be stolen by somebody if somebody is writing or something, right? So we want to get refrain from that. To do this, we use single sign-on. So what happens in a single sign-on? When you open your laptop, you connect your laptop to your company environment, you get authenticated by your Active Directory, and then subsequently, whatever services you are using, right? You are just simply, you don't have to key in the username and password. Even though everything is happening through browser, because most of the time you will be using your browser, right? But all the authentication information which is traveling between your Active Directory and this payroll application or maybe this HR application is transparent of you. It will happen through browser only, through HTTP only, but everything will happen in a transparent way to you. You don't need to have separate password for all of these entities. So once you are having this particular advantage of only having one username and password, it becomes super simple for you, right? You can have a better password. Company can enforce a better password policy, right? You can use a strong password, which is there one time, and that can be used for multiple services. There will be no repeated password. You don't have to repeat password for different things, right? You can enable MFA just for additional security, right? And what will happen is all your password can be managed in a very single, at a central place in a very efficient manner. So management is easy, right? And once you have just one password, don't you think you need to spend less time in password recovering, because you are not forgetting your password now too often, right? So less investment on password recovery and those kind of features, right? Above all these technical things, the most important thing is the user experience. This is the better user experience once you enable all these features. And that is what is called as single sign-on. When we do this single sign-on within a company, let's say this is Active Directory, these are the different services, and this is the particular user, right? We normally as SSO. But this does not mean that your identity can this SSO can only be implemented internally. With the current era of cloud services, SaaS applications, and so many things coming up, it makes sense that we should also extend this SSO outside your company as well. When we say outside your company, it may be for company A, let's say AWS, company B, let's say Adobe. Let's say you are using a company C as well. Let's say a payroll service, which is not which is not owned by you. It is just that you purchase a license and you are giving the services to your employees. So this payroll service is external. When such a need arises, because that is very common thing in nowadays, you cannot refrain from such a thing. You cannot have everything in-house because that will be not cost effective. So we need to also make sure, if we are giving a service, let's say Office 365 to all the employees of your company, or maybe to a specific group. Some people have E1 license, some people have E3 license. Now, how do we ensure that people who access this particular service are authenticated? To enable it, what we do, we go for something called as federation. We go for something called as federation. Federation is nothing but a collaboration based on a common objective. These people are agreeing on that, and to enable this federation, they are enabling some kind of trust between the two entities, like entity A, and let's say this is entity X and this is entity B. So we are going to establish trust. And I told you, whenever we need trust, the first thing which comes into picture is that exactly we need to ensure that the authentication is happening with the right party. It should not be spoofed. To ensure that we are not spoofed and we are dealing with the right entity, it is always mandatory to also have PKI. What is PKI? Public key infrastructure. So based on some public key infrastructure, if both the parties, they are supporting public key infrastructure, then we do certain configurations, and we will do certain configuration on the Active Directory side here. We'll do certain configuration here. This other party will also do that configuration, and they will bind it with some kind of trust configuration based on your PKI. So once that is established, then we are also able to extend SSO outside your company as well. Right? Now, when we talk about SSO, right, the most popular technology which comes in SSO is SAML. SAML, what is the current version?
2.0.
2.2, right? So this is the, you can say, the most popular one, the traditional one, and the most famous. SAML is used all the time, right? What is the full form of SAML?
Security Assertion Markup Language.
Secure Assertion
Markup Language.
Markup Language, right? Now, secure. How this security is ensured? We are making use of encryption, both symmetric plus asymmetric, right? Like whenever there is authentication happening, mostly asymmetric is used for that. Key exchanges and those kind of stuff, right? Or digital signing the messages or the tokens and those kind of stuff, right? Then assertion. What is an assertion? claim. Assertion is claim. So what will happen is, in this particular transaction, we will use certain tokens. We will use certain request, and based on that request, when the authentication happens, then the thing is, we will come out with some kind of token, right? That is why we say claim. And then the next thing is markup language. Now, this markup language is required for one entity to communicate with another entity. In this particular case, there are different entities. Let's say your Active Directory. Your Active Directory is becoming identity provider. We call it as identity provider. From where the actual authentication will happen is called as identity provider. The entity which is going to serve you a particular service, let's say Office 365 or a payroll application or whatever you use, that will be called as a service provider. And the end user entity who is going to use this service will be called as a subject. So there are three key players. Mostly we are calling it as a human being because I have drawn that particular icon for human being. But when it comes to system, it is mostly your browser. Let's say you want to communicate with a, let's say here is your Active Directory. This becomes your Active Directory, which is your identity provider. And you want to access a, service. Let's say Office 365. So this becomes your service provider. Now this guy want to access Office 365, and this is your company boundary. This Office 365 application is residing where? It is residing on some Microsoft server, right? Microsoft data center. And they are providing you a cloud service. Based on that, they have enabled 365. So they are giving you Office 365. That means it is a SaaS service. Right? Now, when this particular person will try to open his browser, or maybe let's say he tried to open Office 365 application, right? Where the request will go? He will be requesting here, right? He will be requesting to the service provider. First thing. Agree?
Yep.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
When the service provider will be seeing your request, what it will do? It will give you a redirect towards the towards your identity provider. But the thing is, it will not directly go to your identity provider. Instead, it will come back to your system or your browser. What it will give? It will ask for a, it will give a redirect, HTTP redirect, right? And with a request for authentication. Now, on your system, you will be actually going back to the identity provider. You will take this, ye aapko mil gaya. You took this. This is something as a request. You will take this request and go back to your लाल नहीं बना, लाल बोलने से फिर गड़बड़ होता है. So this request will go to your Active Directory. If let's say you are not authenticated already, So this will present you with login screen. It will present you with the login screen. Because now you need to authenticate to prove that I am the employee of your company itself. So you have to give your username and password. In case you are already authenticated, then it's okay. It can directly give you token. Right? Once you give your username and password, whatever, it will go back to your Active Directory. Step number 5. Once that request goes to your Active Directory will validate your authenticity, or you can say your authentication will happen. And based on that, once if you are authenticated, then the appropriate level of authorization also will be provided by the IDP. And then it will come back to you here. Step number 6. Now, because you are authenticated and you want to use this service, and there was a request from this particular service to get authenticated, you will take that token. Here is the token. You will take that token and give it to your service provider. Step number 7. Right? Then, based on that, the service provider may give you access, because it will validate the digital signature. Because this token has to come with a digital signature. To validate or to make sure that the service provider is able to identify that this is actually coming from the Active Directory of maybe XYZ company. So appropriately, it will validate the digital signature, but once it validates the digital signature, it will open that particular token. It will set a cookie. It will set a cookie on your system, and then the normal transaction will start happening. You will start using the application. Till when? Till when? If you are not active on the system for 15 minutes and there is a timeout which is set for 15 minutes, you will automatically get logged off. Then again, you need to initiate all this run kahan. Getting my point, guys? Is this clear to you? How the SSO authentication normally happens?
Yes, sir.
So is there any trust established between IDP and
Yes,
Office 360?
100%. 100%. That's the first step. That is the first step which has to happen. Otherwise, how this company will come to know that this is digitally signed by this? Right? You have to establish
called
that
federation,
kind of
right?
configuration, right?
Yes. We need to configure all SPs in IDP to ensure that these SPs will reach me, use my identities for authentication purposes.
Correct, correct. So to establish that trust, first thing you need to do is, first you need to do some configuration. Right? To exchange certain metadata. Not just data. Metadata is more important in this particular case. Right? Both parties must be on what? It should be on PKI. Because when this Active Directory receives this authentication request, this also has to be digitally signed. Then only your Active Directory will actually take it as a genuine case and start working on that. If this is not digitally signed, as is not validated, then it will drop that particular request. Once it gives a green signal here as a token, that is also digitally signed, right? That is also digitally signed. And the same token is being provided to this party here as well. Understood? So we establish some kind of mutual trust. This kind of model is called as a mutual trust. Why there is a mutual trust? Because both the parties has to rely on each other. Right? In case you are not using a public certificate authority in this case, you are using your self-signed certificate. And this company is also using self-signed certificate. Then there has to be an agreement. Now, bhai, ki apna self-signed certificate loge and I will agree to that. Getting my point, guys? So this entire trust model, the trust relationship, is often based on certificate that is exchanged between the identity provider and the service provider. And the authentication token or the authorization token which is provided is digitally signed. Understood, guys? Two things which is very important here. Any questions still here?
It's okay, sir.
Okay, wonderful. Now, coming on to the next part. How the format of exchange should look like. How the data, how this language will look like. We have spoken already that this language is nothing but markup language. This markup language, you might have heard many times, HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. It is using a markup language, which that is called as a markup language. That हम लोग इस टाइप से करके लिखते हैं, those tags, right? We use that is nothing but markup language. Based on this only, the XML open standard came into play. In HTML file, we were only able to represent few text and make sure that if I am designing my website like this on all the system, it should look like this. This was ensured by HTML. The current version is version 5. When we say XML, it just only not it can also take some dynamic authentication information as well, right? Just not about the same representation. Most of the time it is not used for representation. It is used for transfer of data from one system to another system, right? So now this redirection, in this case, there are two things which are important, which is happening, which is called as binding. The first binding here is this redirect request. This is nothing but called as a SAML request. In this case, this is generated by your service provider, isn't it? So if service provider need to create a HTTP, this is normally happening on HTTP redirection. HTTP redirect. We call it as HTTP redirect. So if the service provider don't know your domain or your username or your email ID, can you think the service provider will be able to get this done from your identity provider? If your company is giving you access to udemy.com, right? So you went to Udemy and you want to use SSO. If you want to use SSO, they need to create a separate page and redirect you to the page wherein it actually goes to your company page, so that you click on a link and go to your IDP. Or else Udemy will ask you to provide your domain name. And once you provide your domain name or your ID, then you click on OK, then it will generate a redirect request to get authenticated by the identity provider. Right? So who generates the HTTP redirect or SAML request? Hello? Who
The
generates
service
a
provider.
HTTP redirect request or a SAML request? It is your service provider. Okay. Then what happens is there is something called as HTTP post. This is called as SAML response. Right? So this is nothing but the same thing you are seeing here, right? This token. Who generates this? It is your identity provider who will generate this. What it will contain? It must contain timestamp when the authentication happened. It should also, it is a success or failure. If the authentication was successful or not. Right? It may also contain few more information as well. Because the service provider need to provide you services based on, let's say, your role. Then this ticket also need to have your role, your email, whatever, like those things. So this is nothing but configured during the time. So too much information should not be configured to be shared. Only the requested information from privacy reason only should be configured. Correct? And in both the cases, right? In both the case of redirect request also and response also, we need to use a unique ID. Here also and here also. So that if too many people are requesting the same request, they should not get intermixed. Just give me 30 seconds. So guys, were you able to find it? So first thing we discussed is what? The HTTP request. It is also called as HTTP redirect. It is initiated by the service provider. Then we spoken about HTTP post or SAML response, which is initiated by your identity provider. The third thing we are discussing here is how you relate, how you uniquely bind this particular request and response mechanism by a unique ID. There has to be some numbering given to it, right? So this particular unique ID, what is being given is called as artifact. These are few terms, just remember. This is nothing but a particular artifact. Right? These artifacts are being communicated between the parties by using a SOAP protocol. What is a SOAP protocol? Is it the same SOAP we use for bathing?
No, I think this is a request type, SOAP and REST based API.
Yes, this is nothing but a API request. API.
Yeah.
Okay, so that is what this is exchanged through a SOAP protocol. Understood, guys? So now I think you understood the entire scenario, how the communication between the service provider and the user and the Active Directory, that means your identity provider, happens. This entire scenario can be of two types. Number one, it can be service provider initiated. What we discussed right now is service provider initiated, because the request came from whom? It came from the service provider. Right? What if the user is already authenticated? Let's say you have already authenticated through your Active Directory. Now you are going to access a separate service. Right? it is something which is initiated by your identity provider. So if the request is initiated from an identity provider, it is called as IDP initiated. For example, very simple example, when you go to Google or you go to Microsoft services, you have authenticated by your email once. Now you need to go to your Google Drive, or you want to go and open an Excel sheet, or you want to use YouTube or something like that. Are you anytime prompted for username and password? Never, right? It automatically happens in the backend, because in this case, the service provider and the identity provider, they both belongs to the same organization. So a separate request may not be required. Directly the IDP response may be required. Okay, he is already authenticated. Now he want to go to YouTube. This is the response ticket. Please give him access. So that is your IDP initiated. You need to understand that SSO can be service provider initiated or identity provider initiated. Now, whatever I am going to discuss is very, very important. Please make a note. Right? Next, very important thing is number one. This service provider never directly interact with IDP. Is he communicating? Mr. X is communicating with Mr. Y directly? Are they directly communicating?
No.
No
Service
subject.
provider never interact with identity provider directly. I'm just clarifying few things here. These are all clarifying statements. If this service provider do not know your domain name, आप किधर से आ रहे हैं? Can it redirect आपको identity provider के पास में?
No.
So service
Cannot
provider must know the user domain.
Through metadata.
Right. Yeah, this is metadata. It can be hard-coded by making a button, and in the button you say HTTP redirect to maybe XYZ company, IBM or whatever. It can be made through a button, or it can be through a text button where user will be asked to fill in the domain name for his company.
Yes.
Right? Now, third very important thing. Service provider is a busy guy. They are there to give you idli and dosa whenever anybody reads them. Can they maintain a record for each and every request which is coming to service provider? It is too much of overburden. They will simply ask, okay, you want dosa, take this token, like take this request, go and pay on this counter. Once the paid is there, take a bill and show it to me and I will give you service. So the service provider don't know the user until the assertion response comes back. You cannot go and say to the dosa wala guy, "Bhai, I am already requesting there, getting the bill. Please give me some dosa, at least one dosa." It will not serve you. It will only serve you when for him, the entry point is your response token. So what we mean by this, that service provider does not maintain any state for a authentication or for a request. It does not make a request. ऐसे तो उसको what will happen? So many people will send them requests, and all the time they have to maintain a record. DDoS हो जाएगा भाई. It will be denial of service. Service provider की तो वाट लग जाएगी. So that is why they say You just come to me if your domain already have a trust relationship with me. If whatever you say, okay, I'm company from Cognizant, or I am from Accenture, or I am from this company. If a trust relation is there, then I will verify it and give you a request token. You just take it and get the bill paid. That means authentication done with your Active Directory. Once you come back, only I will serve you. But I will not maintain your record that Manoj is waiting in the line for 20 minutes. For them, it is nothing. Right? Now, let's also see this entire solution from a security perspective. So, what is more important here? What if Mr. X reached to the service provider at 10 a.m. right? And then he is coming back, Mr. X is coming back with a response code, response token, rather, you can say SSO, right? At 10:20 a.m. It should be valid.
If the timestamp is of 10 minutes, then it will be valid.
But do you practically feel 10 minutes?
No,
Should be valid?
So it will be like only 2 minutes or 3 minutes.
What can happen wrong? Why we need to limit this time? Because there can be a
To avoid
replay
the
attack.
idle
Right?
session, yeah.
There can be a
Yeah.
replay attack, a spoofing attack.
Same kind
So
of token we can use.
we need to closely restrict this time. And to do this, don't you think time stamping plays a very important role?
Yes,
All
sir.
the request, all the response should be having a timestamp. That is a must. Getting my point? Second important thing from a security perspective. What if these signatures are missing? Or you can say invalid signature. Because what can happen is there can be a intermediate entity. They say we are from this company, and just to play game with the service provider, they came with a spoofed response token, which is digitally signed. But this digitally signed means there may be a self-signed certificate for this. Not even a company signed certificate. It is a self-signed certificate. Hacker has signed it and sent across to the service provider. Should service provider agree to this? मानना चाहिए उसको नहीं मानना चाहिए. It's a risk, right? So the digital signature should be very closely validated. If there is a slight chance of spoofing or replacing some items there, then the request must be dropped. In that case, let the user come back to the service provider with the request. There will be a fresh request, SAML request, which will be generated. Got it, guys? So this was a little bit about your SSO. I'm open to any questions you guys may have. Let me stop recording.